So it's Kylie and Ori, and we are talking today. This is the ITAM Accelerate YouTube video library. Whatever we call ourselves. Corporate governance process is what we're talking about today. So this is the very first process that leads on to everything else. And the reason why we say that is because unless you've got somebody very senior saying we need to implement software asset management or hardware asset management or cloud management or whatever, then it ain't going to happen. So this is the process where somebody very senior says, I think we need to manage our licenses a bit better, or we had 3 laptops stolen last week, we need to do something about this, and kick off and provide the resources to actually implement a management system that will solve the problem. So the very first thing that your senior sponsor would do, or your top management would do when they say, right, I think we need something to solve the problem, is they're going to take a step back and they're going to think about, well, what does good look like? What does solving the problem look like? And they may not be doing that themselves because they may not know. So they may get consultants in that they pay money to, that's us, that we help, to help think through what does good SAM look like in my particular organisation. Or they may, and hopefully they will, ask the software asset manager or hardware asset manager or cloud manager to actually take that step back and say, right, well, what does good SAM or HAM or cloud management look like for my organisation? So the first step is really to define what good looks like, have that vision, which I think of it as being a light on the hill, so that when we've identified the light on the hill, everybody marches towards it. And it is really useful, I think, to have worked in an organisation before that does this well, because you recognise the light on the hill and you know what it looks like and you know what the route is to get there. You know, instead of being an inventor and, well, I'm changing my metaphors, but instead of having to survey the route for the first time, you've got a pretty good idea of what the route looks like. But even if you've not worked in an organisation that does this well, you still need to figure out what that light is. And so talking with your peers, talking with your colleagues, understanding what good looks like in their organisations, they're all really useful ways of figuring out what that vision should be. So we've got a light on the hill, but of course we need to know how to get towards it. There's marshes and swamps and gullies and cliffs and all sorts of things in the way, and different paths and different turns that we could all be taking. So a strategy is what gives us the key signposts that will allow us to actually reach our light on the hill. So our strategy is the thing which says, okay, after the big oak tree, you need to turn left, or after the swamp, turn right, so that we've got the key waypoints that we need to follow to get to where we want to be. And we also need to recognise that it's going to take, in many cases, years. IT asset management is not something that's resolved very, very quickly or very simply. It's really, really tough. And the reason it's really tough is because it has so many connections to lots of different parts of IT. So we need to make sure that everybody in IT is marching towards the light on the hill. We can't just launch off on our own, because otherwise we're going to get stuck and we're not going to get very far. So we need to recognise this is going to be a multi-year thing in many, many cases. So our strategy not only needs to say, right, turn right at the oak tree, but it also needs to say, we're going to get to the oak tree in about 18 months. And at that point, we need to turn right. So think about your vision as being what good looks like and where the direction that everybody needs to march in, and your strategy as what are the key waypoints that we're going to pass on the way, and at what point are we going to do that? And I find when I'm writing a strategy for organisations that it really helps to think about it in terms of people. So what do the people in your organisation need to do in order to help us march in the right direction? What do we need by way of tools to help us move? What do we need by way of external partners? And what processes do we need to implement in order to actually achieve our goal? So that's vision and strategy in a nutshell.
Yeah. And one thing to bear in mind as well is the customization around that, because you could very quickly whip through some sort of half-assed maturity assessment and score an organisation and say, this is where you are, this is where you need to be, thanks very much. But there's also the potential unique requirements that an organisation might sit in with relation to the sector it sits in as well. So it's impacted varyingly based on legislation or regulation it might have to answer to. So that has a colour. That could put a lens or a skew on the light on the hill, as it were, to stretch the analogy a little further.
Yeah.
You could be working towards a yellow light rather than a white light, as it were.
Yeah, and it's all very well talking to people and saying, well, what does good look like? How do we get there? But unless you tailor it for your organisation and recognise the swamps and the marshes and the little gullies that exist in your organisation, it's not going to be an effective strategy. And the people who need to look at that strategy and say, right, let's implement it, and here are the resources you need, are going to look at it and say, but this is really vanilla. This isn't going to work in our organisation. I want to understand what it's going to take for us to implement this strategy. Yeah. And actually I've seen it. I've seen people, they've had consultants in, and the consultants have really done a very vanilla strategy. You and I would never do a vanilla strategy.
Hell no.
Never. And the senior people who are putting resources towards this have just been like, well, actually, we're not seeing how this is going to work for us. And I've also seen strategies that were defined by the IT asset manager, and they've made the same mistake. They've taken lots of resources, sometimes from consultancy, sometimes from on the web, and they've pulled them together, but they've forgotten to apply it to their own organisation, to tailor it to their own organisation. So how do you do that? Well, the single most important thing that you can do to make sure that you get your strategy properly tailored for your organisation is talk to people. You need to interview every single stakeholder that you can lay your hands on, and you need to ask them, what is it that they do? So that you find out what their goals are. What's their light on the hill? And what are they doing to march towards their light on the hill? What are the problems that they have around software management, or the management of hardware, or the management of cloud services? So what problems can you help them solve, and that you need to bear in mind as you're building out what your strategic plan is? And then once you've interviewed them, and just ask those 4 simple questions. Who are you? What do you do? What's your strategy? What's your vision? Where are you marching? What are your problems and issues with SAM or HAM or whatever? I think that was 3 questions. Isn't there a 4th? Did I say a 4th? Anyway.
I don't think you did.
Those questions. Then you can take all of that information from all of those interviews and really think hard about what's going to work in your organisation. Otherwise, it's just going to be bland, and it's going to be vanilla, and it's not going to work.
Yeah. I can't really add a whole heap to that. I think that's as comprehensively covered as anything there. Other than to mention ISO, perhaps, because we said at the beginning we'd want to mention ISO. Yeah. But having worked on the strategy then at that point, and that's a substantial piece of work in its own right. Then at that point, the offshoot of that is, okay, so we've established the why, to quote Simon Sinek, I think it's Simon Sinek, isn't it? Start with why, is more like the how then at that point, and we eke towards a policy to address that strategy. So we've got this idea of the labyrinth ahead of us. Well, where's the bit of cotton, where's the bit of string that's going to get us there, and that's the policy that's going to give us that. A couple of points to talk about on a policy. Know your audience, know who you're writing for. Not everybody is going to be an IT expert and know the acronyms that you might be happy to wallow in. Set the direction, qualify the scope as well. So you're going to be,
That's really important.
In good ISO language, particularly if you're working in a really large organisation and perhaps the CIO or the CFO is feeling a little timid and wants to start in a certain small area and expand. That's fine too. Whatever works at the end of the day, so long as you make progress. But calling out that scope is really important.
Particularly in terms of the assets that you're managing. So ISO asks us to qualify exactly what assets we're managing. And from there, you will find that your scope defines itself in a sense. So start with the assets and then move out to other aspects of scope, such as which business units are going to be involved, what vendors are going to be involved, that sort of thing. So yeah, so start with the assets. What assets are you going to manage is the really important element of scope.
Yeah.
To kick yourself off with. The other thing I'd say about policy is that there's lots of different definitions of policies, and often you'll find, so for instance, I'm working in an organisation at the moment that actually doesn't have an IT asset management policy, and that's because it's got an IT, a technology policy, and the software and the IT asset management elements of that technology policy are written down into an IT asset management standard. And then below that standard, there are things called procedures, which actually go into more detail about how the standard and the technology, the IT asset management aspects of the technology policy need to be implemented. So when you're in any organisation, it's really important to understand what the bigger aspects of governance are. Many smaller organisations or sort of less regulated organisations may not have a particularly rigid or robust policy framework within which you operate, in which case you may well just have a standalone IT asset management or software asset management policy. Other organisations, particularly those that are in highly regulated industries like health or banking, then they will have very much very specific ways of governing themselves, and that you need to slot in. So understanding what that governance framework is within your broader technology and business organisations is really important to make sure that you align. If you just go out and write a standalone SAM policy in an organisation that already has, very, very comprehensive policy framework, you're really not going to go very far. So it's horses for courses and really understanding your own organisation when it comes to policy.
So just a couple of points on the PDCA and Deming cycle element of ISO as well. Then at that point, nothing really stands still these days. So don't be afraid to put an annual assessment or review on that policy, but also be aware too that outside or external factors can call for that policy to be reviewed as well. So stay proactive to change would be the takeaway expression there. But having crafted your policy, having got your stakeholders signed off to it, we then go through a dissemination exercise. So we tap into our communications and awareness process that we have in the kit. We also look to get a little bit closer to the tech then at that point, and we would kick off a create and maintain a SAM plan process, so an operations plan around SAM or ITAM. And we might then feed into the risk management process as well, because we're starting to demonstrate that we've identified some risks in the past that could be applicable to IT assets because they're inherent with risk. We're starting to accommodate some of those risks or to treat them accordingly.
Yeah. So I think that's it for the corporate governance process. It's really critical to ensuring that you get the resources you need to implement your IT asset management system.
Yeah, because again, without it, you're not going to get the funding as well. That's another case. So it's you're almost tapping into a business, a sideline into a business case here, particularly with the cost around extra staff or extra tools.
Yeah, absolutely. So great. All right. Well, that's it for the corporate governance process, and we'll speak to you soon.
Take care.